Hello, welcome back to the home ground. David Bashir with you. A little bit better dressed as Max Schiffman. It's always in a very sharp suit. Max, welcome.
Not always. I am wearing one today. Sometimes you have to look your best, but it was just to see you, of course.
Good on you, Max. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome Rachael Carroll, TEG Managing Director. TEG, one of the big sporting promotion companies in Australia, an international company. Rachael, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here. It's great.
Tell us about your transition from a professional athlete, an elite pole vaulter many years ago. I can remember commentating on you so many years ago, Rachael, to being an executive of note in Australia in the sports marketing management agency space.
Yeah, well, thank you for pointing out that it was so long ago there, David. But when I think about the physical pursuit of pole vault, it does feel like a very, very long time ago. And, look, it's like probably a lot of athletes or even kids that are at university today had these grand dreams of working in the sporting industry, when I finished school and university, and it wasn't as straightforward to get the foot in the door as I'd hoped, actually. And in my spare time while training and completing my university degree, I decided to create my own company. It was called High Voltage Events with the pole vault spelling.
VAULT?
Yes, it was. And I think I even hand drew my own logo, I think, of a pole vaulter with a ponytail going over the bar. But that was, and what I did is I created a few exhibition pole vaulting competitions that we put into various unexpected locations. We did one on South Bank in Melbourne. We did one at the Moomba Festival. And it was really born out of passion because I felt like if you could show people pole vault up close, it's incredibly dynamic, exciting event within track and field. And back in those days, there wasn't a lot of people watching track and field, to be frank. It's great to see where the sport is going now, but so bring it to the people. And I had them dressed up as Britney Spears and the Phantom and all that sort of stuff. So I think I made about $20 working for 2 years on it, but I had to work with City of Melbourne and various other authorities to make that work, and that's how I found myself into my first job working with the City of Melbourne in sports marketing.
And did that lead to the connection with the Commonwealth Games and the whole snowball that started from there?
Yeah, that's right. So I was in the sports marketing team. So we worked, leveraging the major sporting events of Melbourne. And then the 2006 Commonwealth Games were coming along. And at that stage, a director said, well, she went to one of the Commonwealth Games, so she'll know how to organise it. Of course, very big difference between packing your poles in a tube and measuring your run-up and, organising a marathon course through the middle of the city. But, I was thrown in the deep end and just loved actually, how cities came to life around major events, and it's still a part of what we do now is, there's the event that happens within the stadium itself, but there's the whole journey that the customer or consumer or fan goes through from buying their ticket to getting excited and engaging with the content to actually arriving in the precinct and having that experience. So, from there, working in government for many years, worked on Rugby World Cup 2011 over New Zealand, so lived over there for a period of time. So doing those big events from the government, public sector side of it, and then went to the dark side of being on the private side with promoting. Had my own company, actually became a boxing promoter. I don't think growing up as a young girl I'd end up being a boxing promoter, but we promoted in my previous role the Manny Pacquiao-Jeff Horn fight up at Suncorp, which is still the biggest ever attended boxing event. So cut my teeth on understanding the commercials of major events and sporting content, and then came across to TEG about 4 years ago, and that's been great because of the size and scale. You can then do even more on a global level around sporting content.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge brand. Obviously, deals with a whole raft of different sports and events across, a whole variety of things. Everything from wrestling, through to your international football games and everything in between. So there must be some pretty big differences between the different sports and the different teams you're dealing with and how they operate, and what you have to do to bring them to the table and run the event. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, look, it's what's great about our job is today we would have a meeting on darts, wrestling, football, basketball in a day. So it's really varied in terms of what we're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess a lot of what the companies that we work with are very much involved in the sport development or the development of an individual club or team. And what they want is someone they can stick to their core business, and they want someone that can commercialise for them and deliver an event, and particularly an event in a new market. So where we do a lot of our work is where international, what we call IP or rights holders, so Liverpool Football Club, for example, they run their content in their part of the world exceptionally well. But when they've got to tour their brand to various other locations around the world, they need a promoter that's going to take away all the complexity of doing that. But why we continue to have increasing numbers of either sports or clubs, teams coming to us is that we're becoming, sport, as we all know, is more global, and all of these sports and clubs have to grow their brands beyond their immediate geography. So they want someone to help them to do that and build new brands in new markets, and that's effectively what we do. So we have to make life very easy for particularly those big English Premier League clubs or other international clubs that want to tour. They just literally want a fee and want a really great high performance outcome, and we've had to work very hard to actually understand the sport to a level, because it's not just commercial, it's actually delivering really good high performance experience, because at the end of the day, as we all know, it's often the head of high performance or the manager over maybe the CEO that's calling the shots on where they will tour based on, high performance outcomes as well. So we've had to learn a lot about, the infrastructure needed for training, for recovery, what's expected around ground transport, how many minutes, time zone changes, so that we can deliver on that high performance element, as well as the commercial element that they expect us to do as well. So we've built that experience over time, working with these teams time and time again.
Yeah. Have you found that there are brands that you just can't translate into an Australian context? Like, do you get to sort of decide who gets to come here and who doesn't?
Yeah, really good question. A lot of what we do, again, is in football, and there are certainly clubs that, perform better with a bigger fan base than others. There's some that just don't translate as well. I guess, given that TEG, part of our company is Ticketek, we have great data to actually consider when we're making a decision around what team. So we can actually market size the fan following, but it's also a bit of a gut feel. We're really privileged to tour Wrexham Football Club to Australia and New Zealand this year. No data existed on who is the actual Wrexham fan that's going to buy a ticket to Wrexham, but what we did have was data around the viewership of the Disney show, etc. So there's a little bit of gut feel in it, but generally. And look, what we're seeing at the moment with pressure, cost of living pressures, we are seeing more closely the really top tier content continuing to perform well. If you bring the biggest brands out and there's a good genuine contest as well between two teams, and you've got to look at that rivalry is really important, then it sells. When you start to drop down a little bit further, there's got to be other reasons to come. Like Wrexham, it's not a top tier in the purest form of football brand, but what it offers is they've really delivered on that full entertainment proposition, and we saw a very different market and clientele turn up to those Wrexham games. Mums, kids, families arriving early to go to the turf bar, felt like they personally knew the players. So we're seeing a real evolution. So it's very much horses for courses with what works. But, we're very blessed here in Australia with how fans embrace sport, particularly in Melbourne, where we are today. We know that Melburnians will come out and support a lot of events that we bring to town, and we need people to keep doing that, engaging in the live experience, to make sure that we keep having the possibility of bringing this great content here.
Well, Wrexham's a good example, Rachel, because obviously Ryan Reynolds and the whole Hollywood factor, but is there a lesson to be learnt? That's a one-off match, but is there a lesson to be learnt in the cross-promotion, the drive to survive mentality of sport for some of the domestic sport in Australia to perhaps get a different audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the consumer is wanting more than just to be given a match every weekend as part of a traditional season of activity. What we're seeing with things like Wrexham and the Drive to Survive is we're seeing consumers wanting to know and feel more of an emotional connection to their team. And that's what you see. You have got some sports here that go very well because of the heritage. So that emotional connection, AFL clubs, the religion of many, NRL, you see that handed down through generations, that emotional connection is there, and that helps. They start from a great starting point. When you don't naturally have that, then you've got to somehow create that emotional engagement and connection to the brand and the players and the personalities. And that's what things like Welcome to Wrexham are doing, is they're giving a bit more insight into the club, the players, so that people feel a bit more connected and therefore are willing to make the effort to not only buy a ticket but give up their Friday night, their Saturday, make the effort into town, etc. So, I think there's a lot to be learnt around, how do we bring that out more in particularly emerging sports? How do people get more connected to the actual players? Of course, you do still need, and you've seen Wrexham go up, still do need high performance within these sports. You can't be inauthentic about it. We've talked about, track and field, what can you do with athletics to grow it? It's actually got to be led by stars competing on the world level, and we're starting to see that now. So you still need that level of authenticity as well when you're starting to build these sports.
I got to go to the Wrexham match, and it was interesting to observe. And certainly from what you've said, it resonated with me seeing the kids dressed up as Deadpool and all the other stuff that you saw there. So one thing that struck me, and maybe you can delve into a bit more, is it seems like Wrexham has sort of transformed the way the sporting businesses operate, in that a lot of sporting clubs have come from that sporting history. Their legacy is the fact that they played from a particular period of time in a particular place, and they build on history. But it's almost like Wrexham operate as an entertainment business first, and almost a soccer club second, and the success as the entertainment business has led to their success on the field.
Yeah. And look, we saw that from an organisational capacity as well. It's well known, the Hollywood ownership. They had a very big role in, how the event would be marketed, promoted, positioned. We also saw, investment into the peripheral activity. The turf bar that actually comes out and travels, that was fully funded by Wrexham themselves. It's part of the deal, even in thinking about the right location for that game. I mean, we looked at Amy Park. We couldn't quite fit the turf bar into where it needed to fit. And then we had a fantastic opportunity to partner with Disney. So Marvel Stadium then worked on the Marvel Deadpool Welcome to Wrexham level. Fantastic. It's still a mural that got painted there for the Wrexham game that's still there. It's a permanent feature now of Marvel Stadium. So, we are seeing the way that some of these outfits organise themselves to be quite different. That's a very unique example where you have got a media and entertainment agency almost appended to the traditional club management structure, so that they've really got that focus. But it's helped each other, because the more commercial they've become through treating it like an entertainment business has buoyed up their financials to attract the right players. And here we're seeing the on-field performance increasing as well.
And you've got that cycle. I remember many years ago I commentated on LA Galaxy when Beckham was playing Sydney FC, and he scored a cracking goal, 70,000 at Stadium Australia. And you get that massive peak in interest, but then you get a huge drop-off afterwards for the domestic scene, for the local club, Sydney FC, or whichever club are playing that big team. So there is a challenge there, Rachel, to connect beyond the sugar hit, if that makes sense. So how does football in Australia do that a lot better, do you think?
Yeah, look, it's not easy. It is certainly not easy. I mean, as we know, the A-Leagues and others don't have the resources at the current time to be able to do a lot of the things that we've been talking about already. So it's certainly a very big challenge. It's the global competition for talent is massive. It's very hard to compete with that. I think from my perspective, what we do is, as a promoter, our job is to secure the content that opens up the opportunity. And it's not always easy. I mean, telling these clubs to get on a flight from London out to Australia. It takes a lot of coercion to get them to come out here. But then we always work with Football Australia. We always consider, and we've been working with the APL around, how do we involve the clubs within this? How do they share in the upside, if there is upside? And there's always an element of that. We fund it, and we have to get sanctioned by Football Australia. So the revenues generated from this type of activity does flow back to football as well. I think from there, though, it's, here we are. Wrexham's a great example. Probably captured a whole lot of people that don't normally go to football, that were there for Wrexham because they watched the show. So how is that data now? And we have opt-in data. When you buy your ticket, you can opt in that you can hear from other stakeholders, such as your local A-League club or Football Australia. How is that now going to be mined and spoken to off the back of Wrexham? Hey, you went to Wrexham. Here we go. We've got this match. Come and do X, Y, Z. So I think there's building that database and being able to talk to those fans that turn off for the one-off shiny thing, but aren't willing to engage with their local A-League side. And it's going to have to be slow and steady. It's going to have to be, again, building the resources over time that attract and retain the talent, and tell the stories of that talent that keep people coming back for more.
Yeah. I mean, TEG is obviously a massive international global business, and as someone who lives in Australia, we often see those big international brands come here. So obviously we've talked about EPL and Wrexham and so forth, but you've got NFL, WWE, AEW, all those sorts of brands coming here as well. Like, what are you seeing in terms of that international expansion playing a role in those countries coming here? And are you seeing many Australian brands trying to push back out the other way? And how are you involved in that?
Yeah, no, good question. So, look, we're seeing global expansion huge. Not only is it about growing their fan base and in particular, broadcast viewership. That's sort of number one revenue stream for a lot of the global sports and why they will go into new markets. Merchandise sales, huge as well. But what we're also seeing is the biggest commercial partners of these codes or teams, are head office located in other parts of the world as well. Like we see a lot of, finance, insurance institutions out of Asia that are big sponsors of, and what comes with that sponsorship deal is we want the content to come to us and engage with our fans as well. So, on a number of levels, there's this globalisation happening. And, if the biggest, one of the biggest codes, if not the biggest code of NFL in the world is coming all the way to Australia. It's very interesting. I mean, Australian fans, we really do punch above our weight in terms of viewership and consuming particularly US sports.
I think it's amazing how much breadth we have in terms of sports from all around the world in this place.
And it's just the support, like even ice hockey, NHL, we're the fifth biggest viewership market, fifth in the world. Like you think of all these European consumer. That's why we brought out the NHL a couple of years ago, did a couple of pre-season games, which was a fantastic event actually, really great to be part of. But, so we are seeing more of that. The fact that the NFL have decided to come out here and not only just play an exhibition game, but play a regular points game at the MCG is incredible. And that is about growing that fan base, but it's also been seen to be truly global as well. And, we know that even in the process of deciding on Melbourne and the MCG, the fact that they could stage probably one of the biggest ever because of the size of the MCG, NFL games, that's attractive to the sport as well. So, we're seeing, definitely a lot of sports, they're looking at, okay, how do we take our brand out in an exhibition match or a pre-season or post-season game? But you're starting to then see fans want that authenticity element and move to, well, I want to see a regular season game. So we've heard discussion about Serie A doing regular season games out here. So that's the next sort of evolution. Will we ever see English Premier League? I'm not sure, but certainly that way. I think there's a really big opportunity for our sports here to continue to look globally. Again, it's not necessarily about building a whole league in these other markets. That's a very big, audacious goal, but certainly being able to take content into other markets, just to grow fans, show internationalism, but also for our fans here. we've been working on a couple of codes, local Australian codes, where we want to take, which is very traditional Australian content, into, say, a Singapore or another location. And we know that probably 40% of the crowd that we will attract into that location will probably be Aussies travelling as well. So it's a great thing to give back to the local fans, some of that international opportunity as well. So, but it does take, it takes work. You do need I guess the role we play as TEG as a private promoter is we take a bit of the work. We can stay fully focused on, that it's a commercial success for the clubs and codes, because a lot of clubs and codes just won't have the ability or balance sheet to be able to take a huge risk, such as taking a new piece of content offshore. So I think partnering, with the private sector to take that content offshore is probably the way that other sports should be looking.
I won't ask you which sports, because that's in development under the cone of silence.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, well, you could probably start to guess some of the codes that might work in a location such as Singapore. There's actually multiple codes, Australian codes. That
do they have
work
the
over
space
there.
to play it though? Because they're a bit cramped for land
you're
in
trying
Singapore.
you're trying to lead me down a
Well,
path
I'm trying to
there,
figure out
aren't
which
you?
of the is it a big sport or a small sport.
There's actually both.
Oh, interesting.
An arena and a stadium. There we go.
I think I can guess it. Rachel, what about the message that you got from Hong Kong when you promoted the Liverpool AC Milan match, which was a cracking match pre-season?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Milan won, actually, but it was a new stadium, a state-of-the-art stadium. How did Kitech compare to Optus and Adelaide Oval and some of the other stadia you've worked in Australia? And what was the experience like for the local fans, and what lessons did you learn from that match?
Yeah, look, brilliant stadium. I mean, we've got great stadiums here, like Optus Stadium, MCG, Allianz, like Suncorp, like Adelaide Oval. Like, we've got great venues here. Of course, we're starting to see technology play a major part in, stadiums around the world, the US stadiums, etc. But we've got to be realistic that, the size of our economy and what we can do. I mean, we've got high utilisation of our stadiums, which is really important as well. But, yes, Kitech Stadium in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's gone through an interesting time. Looks very different post-COVID to what it was pre-COVID. So this is very much a local market and greater mainland China audience that we were talking to. So it's quite different for us. But we came in off the back of an unfortunate previous exercise where Hong Kong had attracted into Miami with Messi. And this is always the challenge with, and we've talked about authenticity before, but when you've got one player standing up a brand and, unfortunately, Messi didn't take the field and that caused a very big issue, and that particular promoter had to refund all the tickets because it was heavily fronted by Messi. So we came into an interesting environment where there was a lot of scepticism in the market, and every promoter knows you can't damage that that confidence. But we were coming in very strongly to a new stadium, TIC, and also with 4 big clubs. We actually had Liverpool play AC Milan, and then 5 days later we had the Tottenham play Arsenal as well. So 2 great matchups with 4 big teams. And despite, I think the media were drilling me with questions about player quality, how are you contracting it, how are you assured? And what I kept saying is that these are not teams of 1 star. They've got depth, and this is pre-season. And pre-season, even though it's not regular season, that's still the time that coaches are getting their teams ready to play, in full season. So we were blessed that all 4 clubs made a commitment to us to play strong teams, which they did, and we had 2 sellouts, 50,000 each, and a fantastically close, tight, rectangular stadium, fully air conditioned. So 38 degrees outside. Inside, men wearing suit jackets and jumpers, So it was. It's a remarkable new stadium, and I think we're going to see a lot more events going into Hong Kong because of the investment in that new stadium as well.
Max, we might need a heated stadium in Melbourne, do you think?
I think so, for some of the games that we go to. Imagine the MCG with some heating.
Yeah, I'd love it.
Looking ahead, you're obviously always thinking about what's next, and I'm sure you've got some secret squirrel stuff that you can't talk about, but broadly, like, where do you think those sort of next opportunities are going to come from? You know, who's going to be trying to move from one jurisdiction to another and expand? You know, where are we going to have to go in terms of the entertainment offering that we deliver? You know, where are you seeing all that progress?
Yeah, look, I think as we've sort of mentioned, the desire for regular points content. So as we're starting to see a demand for not just exhibition touring, but a demand for, you know, meaningful competition coming out. I think the Australian consumer is sophisticated that's sort of the next level of demand. You know, I still think we're a long way off in some sports on achieving that. But I think it's tremendously exciting to be seeing the NFL coming out here. You know, the next question is, will the NHL come out and bring, you know, an actual points game to the Australian market? It's possible. You know, we've seen, you know, the NBL doing some NBA team activity. What can that move to in the future as well? So, yeah, I think there's still quite an infatuation with the big US sports as well. But, you know, we were very fortunate to take USA basketball, and it was actually in the lead-up games before the Olympics. We promoted them at O2 Arena over in London, and that went really well as well. So, you know, I think that, you know, that will continue, that interest in US sports will continue down here, and it would be great to see, as we've talked about, seeing our codes, you know, head offshore as well. And then we're just going to keep seeing diversity, you know. As you say, wrestling.
Is there something like totally under the radar or a bit wacky that you think might be on the horizon that you could point to?
Look, wacky is there's certainly a few products that we've worked on previously. I know in my previous role, we created with Duco Events, we created a concept called the Black Clash. And that's where it still goes to today. It's actually got one of the highest viewerships in New Zealand for a sporting event. So it's up there with watching an All Blacks test match. And what it is a game of 2020 cricket with the Black Caps. Some of them a bit ageing, Black Caps, I've got to say, but the Black Caps playing game of 2020 cricket against the All Blacks. Right. And you kind of go, well, how does that work? Clearly the cricketers are going to win. Incredible talent in cross-code. And we even see it here, AFL players, you could have played probably cricket. You know, so there's some interesting cross-code opportunities, and the reason that really worked in New Zealand was obviously the love of the All Blacks and love of cricket. Two great codes, two fan bases together, with back to what we were talking about, David, that entertainment proposition. You know, Hot Spring Spas is the main sponsor. It's got spas all the way lining around the edge of the facility, all players mic'd up so that you're hearing exactly the banter going on between the players. So, again, getting that additional insight. Hugely sells out every year, does about 1.6 million viewers or something. So think about that in terms of a population of New Zealand. Yeah. It's huge. So I think there's some...
Sporting mashups. That's what
Sporting
we're
mashups. There we go. Sporting mashups. So, look, that's really the quirky end of the spectrum. But, again, people are always looking for something a bit new and different to engage with.
Yeah. I think we'll need our viewers to comment with their favourite sports mashups, just by the way.
There we go.
We'll come up with something.
You'll have an idea for TEG to promote.
I'll bring it straight to you, don't worry.
That'll be in Max's mailbox next. Just finally, Rachael, do you go around to some of the major events in Australia? And we've spoken to, you know, ex-Grand Prix CEOs and AFL executives and John Fitzgerald from the Australian Open Tennis and so forth. Do you go around to these events and go, oh, look, I want a little bit of that next time I do an event? What impresses you about the way major events stage their own particular events every calendar year?
Yeah, look, we do it very, very well here. And it's actually not just me going around to these great events that you've mentioned, F1, you know, Spring Racing Carnival, AFL Grand Final, Australian Open, etc., etc. It's great that we bring a lot of the potential people we're targeting. So it might be a team or a code overseas, e.g. the NFL or Liverpool, etc. we bring them out here to experience those events. And, you hear from everyone, go to the Australian Open, go to the F1, they just go, wow, like this is the way that we activate outside of the stadium. Because when you're in a stadium, you can be, and yes, there's different levels of stadia, but you're looking at the field, you're having that experience. And there's only so much control I've got over what's going to happen on the field, but I've got a lot more control as an event promoter or organiser on the experience outside of that. And that's what we do very well in Australia, and it's almost part of our culture that you engage before and after the event. You flow in and you go to the restaurants and bars afterwards. It's part of the culture. So I think that's a really unique proposition that we have to keep doing. And when we bring these great tours and sports out here, we need to make sure that we're trying to replicate. You're never going to, these are big, well-established, well-funded events that we're talking about, but on a smaller level, really deliver that full experience for the fan all the way through. So, yeah, we should be really proud as the Australian sports industry of how we do things, because I get the best people in the world from the biggest codes coming out and going, gosh, you do it really well.
Yeah, we certainly do. Rachel, thanks for sharing your insights. And I can't help but think your life as a pole vaulter has somehow sort of inspired you as a sports promoter as well.
Yes, well, it's a bit of the flashy event meets entertainment, bit scary, living on the edge, perhaps.
That's what I was thinking.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah,
It's great to chat.
You. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Wasn't that fantastic with Rachel Bash?
That was unbelievable. What did you call it? The mashup?
Yeah, the sports mashup. You bring the two bits of sports together and you create something new. I'm sure that's going to be the next thing. It's pretty popular online with other things.
I'll be copywriting that straight away, Max. Okay?
I don't think it's that unique, but do we start maybe linking pole vaulting with, I don't know, diving or something? I was just thinking when Rachel was talking about her sports along the Yarra that maybe they should have been diving in as well and making it something new. So there you go. There's an idea.
I think Jim Courier was the last athlete to dive in the Yarra, and since then, zero. No one.
It's probably a good idea. I'd avoid it if I could too.
So, Max, you are the sole judge. Give us your rankings in the states of Australia and who is achieving in housing reform and moving forward in the housing revolution.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of work to do, and I would call this a ranking of least worst to worst as opposed to anyone's doing an amazing job. But I'd probably have to put South Australia at the top. The SA government's done a lot of work to try and unlock new growth areas. They're sort of not taking anything off the table, which is kind of what you need to be doing at a time like this. So I think they're outperforming. You're probably looking at, I'd say WA second, and maybe a little bit controversial, but they've come off a really low base in terms of new housing supply for quite some time. But they've seen a real acceleration in new starts and approvals, and their biggest issue is not having enough builders to build what they need to build. Then you're probably looking at, I'd say, Queensland, but Queensland has a few real issues where they've got quite a bit of land, but that's starting to dry up, so they might not do as well into the near future. But they also have a real problem with how well larger scale commercial construction sites work. They've got a particular problem with unionised labour, where estimates are less than 2.5 days a week of productivity on commercial building sites. So that's going to be a big constraint. I'd say probably Victoria fourth. Vic, there's a lot of talk. They like to say that they build the most houses, and that's technically true, but they're only really able to say that because we're growing the fastest. And I think what's more relevant is how quickly you're building new housing supply relative to how fast you're growing as a population, and they're not doing that well on that measure, actually. New South Wales will be next, just because they've got some of the most difficult planning conditions and cost conditions in the country, which means delivering at scale affordable-ish housing is really hard for them. And then you're sort of into the, listeners from smaller states and territories, but the rats and mice. So Tassie's sort of not really doing a lot, but and nor is NT. But I'd say the worst actually is the ACT at the moment, funnily enough. Their approvals have dropped massively over the last few years and are not really picking up like other states are, despite all the talk of the housing accord.
You mentioned Victoria are building a lot of houses, but not in the context of that population. Can you just explain the formula and how it works?
Yeah, so every state has its own housing targets. They came out of the federal government's housing accord. But the way the housing accord determined what the housing targets were for each state were based on existing population. And it's a useful proxy, but it's not actually the right way to measure it, because what's more relevant is how much housing you're delivering based on the population growth you're now experiencing as opposed to what you had historically. And so we're in this unusual situation where New South Wales, being the largest state by population, around 8 million people, has by far the largest housing target. The problem with that is Victoria's growing quite a bit faster than New South Wales in terms of people moving here and the underlying population growth internationally and from the States. So it means that Victoria needs to massively outperform relative to other states to keep up with the population growth. And so I've said for quite some time that the relevant measure should be working out how much housing you're delivering based on how much your population is growing. And so as much as Victorian government likes to say, hey, we're amazing, we're building the most houses, once you take into account that it's growing nearly 50% faster than New South Wales, it actually drops to fourth place rather than the most houses being built, which is, not a great performance. You
mentioned that alarming productivity statistic in Queensland. Who are some of the worst performing states in that respect? Is Victoria teetering on the second worst in Australia?
Well, it's probably, again, New South Wales and then Victoria third. And to explain that a bit more, there's been a lot of talk about CFMEU particularly and the cost of unionised labour. It is a real factor. And I've talked previously about the fact that, look, a strong union's great for its members. Like, they get great conditions, they get great pay, they get days off, etc. It's tough work, I get it. But the consequence of that is it's much more expensive to build stuff. You can't have amazing, pay for workers and then complain that it costs too much to build housing, but that's kind of what we're doing at the same time. And so I'm not saying anything that people don't really understand, but as a result of all those conditions and things on those unionised sites, which is pretty much all your mid to larger scale commercial construction sites, you're just not getting that flow through of productivity. And a lot of the larger developers and builders have talked about that problem, and it is a national issue. It is fair to say that Queensland has the toughest conditions there, but we're talking the difference between getting 2.5 days of productivity or less in Queensland and maybe 3 days in Victoria. Like, it's still not a great outcome relative to how much time we put into building things.
And did you see or hear anything from the productivity chat fest in Canberra recently with Jim Chalmers and the whole crew, which included the opposition as well, to feel like they are understanding both the issues and coming up with solutions for the problems?
I think what came out was pretty benign. The biggest thing that they brought out was a decision to freeze the changes to the National Construction Code. So the last review was in 2022, implemented 2023, 2024 across the states at different times, and there was meant to be another revision. And every time they revise the construction code, you've got to redesign your housing, you've got to put new requirements in, there's more cost that goes into it. And so there was a sensible call in the current circumstances from industry to try and pause the next update. And for the longest time, that was being resisted. And interestingly, that was a proposal from the federal opposition in the last federal campaign, which, got knocked on the head by the government. But suddenly, a couple of months later, they've gone, actually, that makes a bit of sense. So I think it's a logical outcome, but it's not going to be the thing that makes housing substantially more affordable. It's going to reduce the increase in cost as opposed to reduce costs from where they are.
Okay, what opportunity was missed? What could they have done that they didn't do?
Well, I think you'd need some pretty substantial industrial reform, and that wasn't on the table. And you'd also need to start taxing property and housing less. And that was made very clear up front that we're not looking at reducing tax take, or only looking at stuff that's revenue neutral or increasing tax out of the round table. And so as a result, you were hamstrung on what you could offer. So, I'm not saying what they came up with was bad. It's better than the alternative, but it's not going to be enough of itself to make a big difference to productivity.
Okay, the opposition said it was not really, that you didn't have enough diverse voices in the room to make a real difference. Do you agree with that?
Well, I wasn't in the room, and maybe I should have been. But for example, housing is such a major issue around the country, and the housing industry bodies weren't actually brought to the table for that discussion. There were some pre-conversations with the Housing Minister's office that, all the industry bodies, Property Council, UDAA, HIA were involved in. But I think it just sort of showed that maybe the priority was wrong. Like, if you don't have housing right as a country, then the entire economy suffers, and productivity suffers everywhere. And so to sort of be brought down to being a second tier from, groups like the big banks and others, I didn't think that was necessarily the right move, given how important the housing conversation is.
Okay, Max, from our socials, St Marnie off town says about the housing crisis. It's not a crisis, it's a scam. Leveraging and negative gearing should be a crime. What do you reckon?
Wow, okay. So I'm not sure what the housing crisis as a scam is meant to mean. It's a real thing, and it's only getting worse, I'm afraid. So I'll sort of dive in more into maybe the last part, which is the negative gearing. So I've had the view for a while that part of the problem with negative gearing is the name. People think it's like this massive tax rort that all these rich people are getting, and that's really sort of not the truth. There's been analysis done across, I think it was the RBA, that looked at into the impacts of negative gearing, and they estimated that it's anywhere between 1% and 4% maximum of the value based on negative gearing. And that's before you sort of consider the positives of more rental housing being in the market, which is what negative geared properties are doing. They're negatively geared because it's not someone who owns it living in it. They're renting it out to someone and actually making a loss on the income they're getting. So I think there's a lot of focus on negative gearing just because it sounds really bad, and there's an increasing perception that property shouldn't be used as a wealth generator. And I can sort of understand that for younger people when they're feeling so alienated. I think the better solution is to actually get enough housing built. That's a much better thing. And negative gearing is a really important part of that, because every investor that you're taking out, if you're not replacing it with a new investor in the market, then you're actually reducing your supply of rental properties at the moment. And that's precisely what we're seeing around the country, that the fewer and fewer people are holding on to investment properties. Some of it is just the fact that interest rates have gone up a lot and they can't afford to. There's also been quite a number of changes at state levels trying to discourage investment to an extent relative to bring home buyers in. And that's all well and good in the short term, but over the long term, if you're not building replacement housing for rental, all you end up doing is making rentals more scarce and therefore more expensive. And I'll make this little point as well, because there's a lot of talk about build to rent as a new asset class, and I think we've hit roughly 40,000 build to rent apartments now across the country, which is quite a lot, and roughly 20,000 of those are in Victoria. But think about it this way: a private investor gets the negative gearing benefit, and therefore they will actually take a slight loss on, call it the true value of the rental property relative to the yield and the cost of running it. But if you've got a large institutional owner owning an entire building and they can't use negative gearing because they're not an individual, guess what? They have to make a big profit on the rental, which means rentals are only higher. So I think it's a bit of there's just this focus on that policy without sort of thinking through the broader implications of what it does to rental and housing affordability.
Yeah. And as we move into the sort of warmer months of the year, you've sort of got that contrast between a bull market in the stock market at the moment and a real crisis in housing in Australia that doesn't look like it's going to be solved anytime soon.
Yeah, well, again, supply is the issue, and we're now 34 months into the housing accord nationally, where we should have approved something in the order of 286,000 homes, and we've approved 203,000. So less than 3 years into the accord period, we're 83,000 homes short, and that number's only going to keep growing. So that's a pretty scary place to be at the moment. And the other thing that's happening is, we've started to see the impacts, early days, but there are impacts on the market in terms of the effect of interest rate cuts, because we're now 3 interest rate cuts in, and certainly the market's now seeing an increase in auction clearance rates, prices starting to rise uniformly around the country again, which is the first time since COVID. So it's only going to make that affordability piece even more troubling. One thing that happened recently was the announcement from the federal government that they're bringing forward by 3 months the 5% deposit scheme. So in other words, as one of the election promises, but they've now got a scheme where you only need 5% of deposit, and the federal government comes in and guarantees the remaining 15%. So the banks don't charge you lender's mortgage insurance, which reduces the cost of your mortgage and also lets you get in without a full deposit. So that's a good policy in the sense that it gets more people through the deposit hurdle, which is a major barrier for a lot of people. But like all such things, whether it's that or a first homeowner's grant, you name it, if it's not coupled with enough new supply to catch up, then all you do is inflate pricing, and we haven't caught up on the supply side.
We certainly have, Max. It's been a pleasure. It was great to chat to Rachael earlier today.
Yeah, no, she was fascinating.
Yeah, really interesting look at different aspects of sports promotion, wasn't it?
That's right. Well, hopefully I don't know, maybe when the WWE comes out next, they can get me on the ring and we have a wrestle or something.
What, from the top ropes?
Yeah, I'll jump off the corner. Why not?
Just watch your safety, okay?
All right, I'll do my bit.
We'll see you next time on the home ground.
Catch you soon.